I would say for my flower paintings, they're so much fun to do. They're very meditative and they're very intuitive. They're my way of inviting improvisation into my paintings in a way that's easier to do than if I was painting a landscape. But we're going to do some painting today, and it feels like a really long time since we painted flowers. So I went to the grocery store yesterday and I bought a bouquet. And I really like buying grocery store bouquets when it comes to painting flowers because they are often not really the best. They're not at their prime. And that gives me a little bit of freedom to improvise. So we're going to do that today. And before I do that, I just want to welcome you all. Those of you who are new, especially if this is your first time watching one of my live studio sessions that are exclusively for the members of the Fearless artist community, and I need to also train myself. We're starting to transition to calling it the heart-led artist community, just for obvious reasons. I think heart-led is such a clear explanation of our goal, the goal that unites us here as artists. If you're brand new as well, we do these live sessions. I try to do at least 3 a month. As much as possible, depending on my travel schedule and so forth. And sometimes we even get one every week in a given month. So I already showed you part of my grocery store bouquet, and I pulled out some different flowers in some of the colors that inspired me there. I really liked, and it's funny because they're like the most shrivelly part of the bouquet, but I really like these tiny roses. They are a little bit dry, and so they've got some interesting texture on the edges of the petals, and I just think that's a beautiful color. So I think this is going to be my main focus as I paint today. There's lots to inspire me. There's purple flowers, there's some pinky daisies, there's carnations. So it is a nice, well-rounded bouquet. But I know that when I paint florals, a little flower dust on there, I know that if I get too complicated, I tend to end up with an arrangement that is uneven. So I think we're going to just focus on painting the roses. And there's a couple different ways you can go about this. If you're wanting to paint flowers, sometimes we think that we should just start painting the flowers. And that's great. Then I have beautiful flowers on a white background. Often I invite a lot of flow so that I do get a little bit of background color happening. But sometimes I like to paint my background first, and then I get a little more depth in my arrangement. So I was thinking I'm going to demonstrate that because it is something that's hard to demonstrate in a live session. And I did prep a little bit. That's another reason I was late, is I did prep a background. So I'm going to start by just showing you how I paint my background. Okay, let's warm up with a little bit of wet and wet painting. And starting with the background is a great way to start painting flowers. And I would often, if I wasn't doing this as a demo, it would be very possible that I would want to do 2 backgrounds before I get started with painting the flower details. And I was thinking, well, I'm going to do the same thing I did with my first background. And that was, I started with a little aureolin, yeah, I just can't say it today. And that's kind of a lemony yellow. It's very cool. It almost looks greenish on the paper. And my damp brush. This is Hanamula's The Collection watercolor paper again. And my Lebenson paintbrush, which I have just been beating up. And that aureolin I really want to dilute. I'm painting just this one corner, and I'm going to let it flow. And there's a few little holes there. Notice, I think anytime I paint a hole, that white space can really stand out once the painting is dry. So I want to be careful that I put my holes in spots that help support the framework of the painting. And I'm going to use some Aussie Red Gold to warm up my yellow and invite a little bit of that antique-y orange color in. It's going to pair well with the aureolin and give me kind of that buttery, rich yellow that's in the roses. So I'm again working in a kind of a V shape, starting in this corner. I have a device that I use, a structural device that I use when I'm painting flowers, and that is that I usually think about a triangular or a Y shape. moving kind of diagonally across the page. I almost always rely on that shape, and that really helps me have a structure to start out with that then can, my composition can be built on. This is Cascade Green, goes on very, a little opaque. That is Cascade Green, isn't it? Yeah. I think that I had a little zoisite on my brush as well, and I'm going to accentuate that Y shape by bringing in my Cascade Green and then diluting it to let it flow and get nice and soft. Cascade Green is one of these colors from Daniel Smith that separates as it flows. It's actually a single pigment color, but for some reason when it's diluted, you get this separation of blue and green that's really quite fascinating. And so knowing that it does that, I like to work with Cascade Green and a lot of water. That really helps Cascade Green be beautiful. If I work with it quite dry, it just doesn't have the same magic. I'm going to dot in a little more aureolin. And one thing I really want to do is I don't want to go too dark too soon. I want to let things dilute and flow. So I'm just adding water right now. And I'm taking away most of the little white spots in the first layer. So there's a little bit of white open spaces here where the paper is still dry, just in this kind of section, right towards the center where I know I'm going to want people to be spending the most amount of time looking. So that's a good spot to leave edges, which is what those white spaces are. They're going to create edges. And we're just letting it flow. We're letting it be beautiful and delicate. And that's the secret, is not fussing. Let the water do its work. I'm going to bring in a little bit of pink. This is Holbein's Bright Rose. I want to have a little bit of perhaps a pinky undertone to suggest background blossoms, to suggest my Alstroemeria. But we want to dilute that quite a bit and just have that hint of kind of pinky warmth. And there's a really beautiful greenish yellow that's happening here as the Cascade Green mixes with the aureolin. So that's kind of nice. I'm getting this weird trail over here that's not as nice. It's going to be a distraction because it's also creating an edge. This is excess water from the Bright Rose. It's pushing into the Cascade Green. It's making a trail. It could become a leaf actually, but I'm going to just add a little bit of water. And that's going to take away that trail, widen out that flow, and give me a little more softness there. Blotting again. I feel like maybe let's dot in a little bit more of the Aussie Red Gold. Let's suggest there could be a rosebud over on this side later. So let's put a darker shape there. I made it bigger than I was planning, but that's all right. And maybe a little bit here. And I'll darken up even in this corner here just a little bit. And I wonder what would happen if, and that's always a good question to follow, let's put a green, strong green shape in here and let it flow. I love that little whoosh that happens when my paint starts to move like that. It's so pretty. One thing I want to comment on as we set this aside to dry and bring the other one back is that you want to be aware that when you're painting a flower arrangement, and we're kind of inventing it, you know, I've pulled these flowers out, but they're not really doing anything beautiful. So we're designing the way the flowers are going to be arranged on our paper, and it doesn't work every time. I would say for my flower paintings, they're so much fun to do. They're very meditative and they're very intuitive. They're my way of inviting improvisation into my paintings in a way that's easier to do than if I was painting a landscape. But I don't get it right every time. My balance gets thrown off. Sometimes I'll paint flowers that don't really, one area of the painting looks too dominant or clunky. I get my arrangement just looking false in some way. It looks forced or too awkward. And so that happens. One way that I can avoid that, I'm seeing a lot of really beautiful, interesting shapes that could become flowers. And I will really want to take my time as I pull out shapes and develop this further. Slowing down and spending more time watching the paper than moving the brush is my superpower here. It's going to be what helps me to not create shapes and brush strokes I regret later. So we're going to set this one aside to dry. There's a really beautiful rainbow of color that's happening right here. The pink flowing down, the orange, we've got that blue and green from the Cascade Green. It really is a rainbow. It's just, and it feels a little bit purpley too. So yeah, it's super pretty. Let's look at our flowers again. Before I touch my brush to the paper, I really want to have a next step visualized in my head. And this also is helped by not rushing ahead. If I can see the next step in my mind, it makes it much easier to implement with my brush. So I'm okay with pausing and watching the paint. So let's take a look at these rosebuds. And it's kind of funny because some of them, they're very bent over. They are a little sad and damaged. But we have some really beautiful shapes here. It's kind of an oval shape of the rose. And then we've got some petals coming off. We've got these little tendrily framing leaves that's holding everything together. So I want to keep in mind the overall shape rather than every tiny detail. And now I used Aussie Red Gold for my warm orangey yellow. So we're going to work with that again. There's a little shape here, and maybe I'll zoom in so you can see better. We're going to just see what we can pull out right over here. We're going to paint the side of one rose. So I'm just getting a little bit of that oval rounded shape there, touching in a little bit of the bright rose as well. And we're going to, I think I'm going to pull a stem out so that I have some direction to go as I paint. So we're going to touch in that Cascade Green, and you can see there's like a pool of liquid here. I really want you to see that, so let's go in even closer. There's literally a puddle. And that means we're going to get a lot of flow and a lot of color mixing. So I'm going to start lifting slowly some of that excess moisture so that the pigment stays where we put it. My thirsty brush will lift that out and leave some pigment behind. See how pretty that is? And we're going to just soften, I think, this side and let it kind of disappear into the background. And I'm going to soften right out towards the edge here, so we don't get any edges interrupting our flow as our eyes flow through the painting. Let's place our next rose right in here, again with rich saturated Aussie Red Gold. Catch maybe one of those petals that's kind of pulling away. And then softening. And do you see what I mean by this being meditative? We're working really slow. This is thoughtful, slow work. There are things I know about roses that help me paint them. One is that the closer you are to the center of the rose, the more tightly the petals are clustered. And that's really helpful. Noticing that the edges tend to be a little bit darker. And I'm just not, I'm not bringing in any shadow colors. I'm not looking at my rose and going, okay, I need to bring in blue to be a shadow on this side. I don't want to go there at this point. And I really like that soft shape. It's super subtle, but look how pretty. So I'm not even going to add anything there. It's not a rose, it's a hint of a shape. It's a secret, but we're going to leave it like that for now. And then later, maybe we'll want to expand upon that secret, or maybe we'll just let it be. Touching in a little bit of pink. We do not, and I really try, one thing that's important to me here is giving myself permission. That's the Cascade Green, and it's very dominant right now, which means I'm going to move it. But I really want to give myself permission to just let the painting be pretty. It doesn't matter whether anybody can tell what kind of flowers I'm painting. The most important thing is this beautiful flowing shape. creating some beauty on the page. And I'm really inviting a lot of water in there right now. Look at how much water that is. But it gives me those very thin veils of pigment that keep that delicate shape. And I kind of like that line that's created with the water there. So I might just leave that, that very wet shape. Let's touch in some Cascade Green and let it move. And that will define that stem shape. And you know, I like it when this feels like enough. When not that I'm going to stop and call my painting done, but this shape doesn't have to be any more than it is right now. And so I can then kind of move and look for a way to make pretty somewhere else. And hint at another rose shape maybe here. And this little blob is very weird, so we're gonna soften that and let it flow. So as I paint, I just get to work with some colors that are lovely, and that's my main. You know, that's our privilege as artists. You know, and as I think about that, it makes this suddenly a painting that's very, very peaceful. I think one thing that we do is if you're struggling to have your paintings turn out is we put that pressure on ourselves that, oh, this has to turn out. And I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm just adding a little bit of a pink shape that maybe that could be Alstroemeria. It's an Alstroemeria rose hybrid, so I don't they're somehow they've mutated together, and I don't have to think about how to separate them right now from each other. I'm just putting in that little hint of a pink shape that will create a nice little frame over here. But letting go of this idea that my painting has to turn out gives me the chance to just be in the now, just be right now, painting because I have pretty delicate shapes to place on my paper. And that is a gift. That is something that I appreciate. I can just be here and make pretty shapes. And if they disappear into general muddiness as I paint, the time that I spent painting was my gift for today. My gift to myself for today. I want a richer green up here, so I'm going to just try dotting in a little bit. And letting it flow. And out from my main, the middle of the page, everything should be very, very soft. Compositionally, I want the eye to notice pretty things around the edges, but I want most of all people to move to the middle of the painting where my flowers are going to be mostly clustered. I'm thinking here, I want to paint some rosebuds up here. I'm not sure what's going to go in between these shapes and connect them. I want my viewer to follow the stems up the painting to these roses, and then I also want them to move over here. So I think what I'll need to do is draw some flowers up here and maybe have a stem or another background flower here. Let's put that rosebud here that it's kind of calling out to be painted. I think I'm going to place it here. And again, with the strong pigment. And yes, for me, flowers are actually a business expense because I can use them to paint lovely paintings. So I like to remind myself that that gives me permission to buy flowers whenever I see pretty ones at the grocery store or elsewhere. So I've softened out most of that Aussie Red Gold, but left a bead of pigment over here as well. I think. Let's add a touch of that pink. The pink is so pretty over here. It's just such a beautiful pairing with the Aussie Red Gold, the Holbein's Bright Rose. It's supposed to be a more light, fast alternative to Opera Pink. I don't find it quite the same as Opera Pink. It's a little more blue, but it is a beautiful color. And I'm going to do the same stem drawing down thing that I did over on this side. And it's connecting to the wet paper already, so suddenly I have this lovely edge that's now flowing into this area, which is a very soft pinky peach. the temptation here immediately, as soon as I've painted this, because in my head I go, oh, it's a stem, is to paint that green. And I don't think I want to. I'm going to try to put a little bit of green alongside the shape, and we'll dilute that. But if I put green here, I love this soft, delicate pinky peach area so much, and I don't want to sully it. I don't want to contaminate it with a grayish green. So we're going to try to keep them separated right now. And I'm just going to instead bring my green shape kind of out this way. One thing I really love about this brush is the more I batter it, the more interesting edges I get with it. Look at that. Oh, there we go. Now I've opened up this shape. I have connected them, but because of gravity and the angle, the pink is actually flowing into the green rather than the green flowing into the pink. I'm okay with that. So let's just add some softness there and flow that right away from the flower to the edge of the paper. Now most of this side of the paper is soaking wet. Look over here. Look at the colors in there. We're just going to have a little moment of silence for this beautiful spot, beautiful mixture of colors, and then just above it, there's some really interesting texture that's happening there, and the green and the blue separating, as I mentioned that they do. Just really, really pretty. Lovely little tendrils of color. A delicate brush. And there's also, I think, something to be said for this mindset of being willing to pause and wait, let the painting be lovely, and just work with that delicate touch. So, and notice the pretty things that are happening that you don't have to make. We have all these have-tos in our heads. I have to paint the rose petals, each individual petal. I have to paint the shadows. I have to get the leaf shape right. What is right? I think right should be pretty. That's what's right. Getting it as making beautiful shapes that are flower-esque. I mean, that is happening. We are seeing that beauty happen. Painting another rose here. I'm tempted right now to pause and count them and see if I'm getting a nice, uneven number, because that's supposed to be prettier. But I'm actually going to look at that. I'm going to make a little cluster. That could be one rose. That could be one big rose, or actually a couple of small ones that are kind of connected. Softening with a little bit of water. I am going to touch in a tiny bit. The deal is that the Cascade Green brings in some blue into the painting. So I'm going to try and touch a little Cascade Green in right here, very carefully, just a tiny bit, just with a hair of the brush. And that's how much that brush wanted to release. It just was a hair of the brush touching, and look at how that flowed. But it's doing pretty things. We're going to zoom in so you can see it. So that's not my brush moving. What did I do? I touched that pigment to the wet paper and it did the rest. Look how beautiful. Oh, I'm having so much fun. I'm so glad you're here. It's beautiful. And it's my painting. I've stopped worrying about whether or not it looks like any other artist or anything like that. I'm just here for this little beauty is coming to life under my brush, and I get to enjoy that process. Let's pull another rose in here. I think we're going to fill in right through here with roses. Why not? And so we're going to pull that shape in, and that's pretty just the way it is. Let's pull another one in over here. And my brush is pretty much clean, so I'm going to define the shape first and then find my Aussie Red Gold and let it kind of spill into that shape. And we're going to soften this quite a bit along that top edge so that it really flows very, very softly up out of the page as well. We have some openness. Edges, remember, edges serve as kind of a fence. They're a little bit of a barrier. And so when you paint an edge, it tells us stuff, it gives us details about our painting, but it also is like a fence. You follow the fence. You follow the fence line with your eyes. And so we want to make sure that any edges we're placing move the viewer along the painting, that they get to follow the shape of the scene. I'm bringing in the bright rose again. It's so pretty that I think we're going to use it to pull out and define around this rose just a little bit. And I'm going to zoom in so you can see it. It's very, very, very strong right now compared to everything else, that is. I wouldn't say there's any super strong bold shapes as in some of the other bold shapes I've done in previous paintings, but it's helping us define this little flower. And we're just going to soften now and lighten, lift a little bit, touch and lift, lift, lift. But didn't that make that little petal shape come alive? We need flowers this time of year. Getting some beautiful color in, just so enjoyable. Remember, adding a dark color can really tell the viewer what to look at as well, especially if it's the only dark color in that area. So suddenly the eye only wants to go here as I add in the green. So then I might soften and lift again. So we have a shape that comes and goes a little bit, lost and found edge. Yeah, that's pretty. My paper towel is getting really damp. And I've already been using it for like 3 or 4 paintings. They last a long time. Okay, let's pull back and take a look. I almost feel like this is a very clear spot to stop and just enjoy this pretty little arrangement. Look how beautiful that is. And the eye, okay, so what does the eye follow? Let's look at how this painting is working for us. Where does the eye go? We can see there's an edge here that brings us up and it points us right into that center of impact. We've got this beautiful pink edge that is very dominant as well. Our little fences. Our fence also goes along here. There's a line, that's an edge. And the other thing that moves our eye through the painting are the pops of pure Aussie red gold. There's a little bit here, so we go out to that corner, but then we come back to these pops of Aussie red gold here. And this little line, it's a broken line, but there's actually a broken line of pure pigment all the way through where we want the viewer to look. The green, Cascade Green does a lot of that as well for us. And there's little kind of supporting edges. There's a really beautiful little edge here that's just soft and delicate. There's a really beautiful pattern of color right here that's so, that's just lovely. And these are little elements that we pull the viewer in with our lines. They see those edges, then they pull, and those pops of pure pigment pull them into the painting. And when we get them in close, then we astound them with a beautiful, soft transition of color that has happened because we let gravity do its job, and we let those lovely colors intermingle on the page. And as those things happen, we get this lovely piece of magic that we got to be a part of.